something Leffen said to me. He said, "Soon we go to war." Like he said it like he had a real conviction to it. And like to me, because at the time, I'm thinking of Melee as a dance, as a conversation, as something as you want the person to play well and you want to create something beautiful, right? So like, I'm like, so I hear that and like I struggle to not laugh, and I'm like, yeah, man, that's what's about to happen, I guess. It's a very funny.
First off, PP, thank you for joining me here on the After Metagame sort of debrief.
Thank you for having me.
It's awesome to talk to you again. I know, I've done this with Leffen and Armada now, and sort of getting everybody's sort of takes on everything after the fact is really interesting, especially because so much time has passed between when the events in the documentary happened and now when it kind of released. I guess maybe where we might start is sort of what were your thoughts when you first saw it, the series? It was over a course of 3 days, of course. What were your favorite parts you thought that could have been done differently, and then things that maybe weren't in the documentary that you think maybe warranted more coverage?
Well, to your last question, things that I think should be in the documentary that should warrant more coverage. Well, the funny thing about me is I don't do documentaries for a living. So I don't think that I should have a higher authority than you on that. Is my take. But yeah, I mean, certainly I don't really feel like I'm in a place to complain about how it turned out, right? I mean, I had a ton of focus. I had the pound 5 moment, and I had, the ending thing, and my gem lit up and everyone else's gem was shattered. I mean, like, yeah, I mean, there just wasn't enough me. I don't know. I mean, I understand people's criticisms about the other players and things like that, but it's like, after discussing it with you, I understand why the decisions were made. And, I mean, there was so much on your end that sounded like it could have been a different series, or it could have been a movie, or it could have been longer, or, you could have got paid more, and then all these things could have happened. Oh, well, but it's like, at some point the thing has to be made. At some point you've got to figure something out. And, after the way the first one went, I'm just happy that I got my story told, because when I sat down with you, I said, I want my story told. And I realized I'm not answering your question, so I'm going to go back and do that now. I mean, my all-time favorite part of it was the pound 5 sequence. Like there was such a self-contained story of, I went to college, I had these problems, I was still trying to find myself despite this. I had personal growth from all of these things. And the music and the flashbacks from before to my story and everything, it's such a neat encapsulated ball. It doesn't really upset anyone. Even Armada's cool with it now. So it's like everything is about it is just good and fine. And I like that. And so that for me would definitely be my favorite part. And then I will be honest, I don't even really know what I think about the Apex 2015 part, because I was just a mess during that, because I was so tense leading up to it. I was so unbelievably tense because I remembered when we were going to talk about it. Well, actually, this is what I was saying before. Imagine not going on a tangent. I said leading up to our conversation before when you're getting your footage from Metagame, I knew, because I kept to myself so much. I mean, it took me until 2019 to even start streaming. I really kept to myself so much, and other people don't have that reservedness to them. Some people are very expressive about what they think and how other people should be thinking and things like that. And I'm not so much that type of person. And so when I knew that you were going to come and talk to me, I said, this is my chance to tell my story. And so, I mean, it was very vulnerable for me in that way, because this is my shot. This is the makeup time for years, or of never talking, pretty much. And this is really important to me. This is important for me to feel understood by people. And that maybe that's not fair to put on someone else, right? Like maybe that's not the right thing to do, but that still is part of what I was tense about. at the same time, there was so much of like, I knew there were things that I said because I was in a certain place. I was like, is this going to be said? Is this going to be talked about? Am I going to look, a way that where people are going to really understand me as a complex individual and not just someone that's really depressive? I think that there were some people that did kind of walk away from the documentary thinking of me as a very depressive person. Um, and I don't think it's necessarily inaccurate, especially for the time period. But I guess it's my hope that I can, through the work that I have to do now, or the work we do together, or this even here, there could be an additional layer dimension to me shown too, and I really like that. But um, to kind of fully answer the Apex 2015, I was so nervous about the view, how it was done, and then I thought it was being done well, and then maybe there were parts where I was like, I don't know, but I was just so emotional. Like I really try hard to not cry at things because it's how I was raised. I mean, I could talk about that some, but it's very heavily discouraged in me to show emotion and especially sadness. And so, but there was just a moment in it where I am talking from the past, and I say, I should go for this. I deserve it. I'm worth it. And it wasn't in a I deserve it more than other people, but I deserve to do my best. I deserve to show my worth. And that's something that, I didn't even realize that I needed to still think about, but it's something I've been focusing on, so much for, I think, really the past few months, past year in the work I've been doing. And I just couldn't, there was no holding that back. And I just broke down and I started crying. And then from whatever happened in the documentary after that point, there's no properly evaluating that. There's no, oh well, oh, but the lighting or the cinema, like there's none of that, because it is the experience, it is the raw emotion on my end. And I mean, I think there's a part of me that wants to go back and honestly evaluate it, but there's also the part of me that says, well, what if it goes like that again? What if I, feel all these things again? Am I ready for it this time? And it's still, this internal thing, but that's not to fault your work. That just means your work did really great, a really beautiful thing at evoking this emotion for me and coming in at honestly the right time for me. So thank you for that.
Dude, my pleasure. I know that we only shot for maybe a period of 1 or 2 days, I think, where we
Yeah.
really sat down for like 5 hours each day and discussed stuff. So that really, it felt like sort of an outpouring where you were getting a chance to sort of finally tell your story and get that out there. And I really keyed in on that when you were describing your story, and it reminded me a lot of myself in certain ways. And so I think that had a large part. I kind of had a feeling that you had a story to tell before we even sat down.
Mhm.
Just based on what I knew about your history and the Smash community and stuff. So I was really excited and happy to sort of be able to tell your story. But you're right. It is interesting, and this is something that ties into everybody else's sort of reactions, I think, to seeing themselves portrayed in a documentary, be that Leffen as evil Leffen, or Mango as, some uncaring, brash guy that uses slurs and stuff.
Oh, I'm
Like,
sure we're going to talk about that.
well, yeah, just basically that in a documentary, especially when it's like taking place over a small period of time, it is difficult to sort of get an entire picture of someone, especially if you're dealing with sort of I guess caricatures in a way, because you guys were gods in a sense, but it's always sort of like this jokey thing. It's like that nobody in the community actually thinks you're deities with supreme powers, although maybe there are some that actually think that.
I think that really did change perception when that narrative started going around. I really do, and I think that's something that really distinguished our community. It's funny. Scar took that from Street Fighter and applied it to Melee, but then the Melee people really lifted people up. Really, just really, it's all about them, and I think that was still somewhat the case, kind of even in old school Smash. Like people really had a lot for Ken and a lot for Mewtwo King, even when he was coming up too. But obviously the Isaiah, if he tried and everything, right? Like there was so much. I think Melee just kind of has that factor to it. But then we had something. We had all these events and these people pushing all of this together, and so I mean, a lot of people want the gods narrative to die because of how compelling it is. Well, at least how it was, and then to some extent, how compelling it still is.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and that's the thing is like I felt like for the story that I wanted to tell, and that I think that your story in particular kind of helped accomplish this. Is that it kind of got inside of your guys' heads, and you were able to sort of see your progression from punish heavy. And the way it connected to the game as well is like you had a two sides to yourself that you were able to explore throughout the whole thing, and it really humanized, I think, in that sense. But yeah, to your point, it's hard to kind of to give someone, if you're playing with these sort of anime style storylines, someone a full human shake in
And
something
let's
like
not
that.
forget too, if any of that is contrary to what they themselves put out, this can create problems.
Right, and that's the thing too. It's like in the time, like Leffen, when we talked, he was very forthright with the fact that he was leaning into the evil Leffen sort of perspective, just to build his brand and to sort of get out there. And as Chillin put in a way, like he had an agenda basically, with his
Oh
tweets
yeah.
and stuff.
Oh yeah.
So like that, it's I think that it's a viable way to say that like a lot of these sort of characterizations can be viewed as uh, part truths, and in the same way,
Sure, sure.
in the same way that like and correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't it a Taoist saying that anytime you open your mouth, it's like you can only speak half truths.
Sure. I mean, there's so much of what Bruce Lee talked about where there was a lot of discussion, which is very funny, but there were a lot of things that he would say where, words do not convey the essence of something. And I would get that from different things I'm reading, The Inner Game of Tennis, The Art of Learning. Like there was so much about, I would just kept coming back to words don't really capture the experience of something. And so I think it's kind of an interesting thing, right? About between a book and a documentary. Something I wanted to kind of ask you about, but we went for a really long time, so I didn't get the chance to. But the mediums are very different, and the documentary is going to give you like an up close experience with someone, and you'll hear their words, but it's with their body language and with everything that they do, and you get all the extra intent. Right? There's talk about how communication is 90% body language and 10% vocabulary and things like that. So I mean, there's all kinds of ways to look at this. But I mean, the downside of a documentary is there's got to be an endpoint. There's got to be a cutoff. There's whatever you have is whatever you have, or maybe life is just it doesn't conform to the nice rules that we could put in place for fiction, or it's like it's there are just challenges there, and then there are also just a documentary is what it is. It's that snapshot of time. It's those people being those people, and then you're trying to stay true to what they were seen as, but also what else they have to offer, what else they can show. And so I think that's a real challenge. And I'd say overall, I think you honored that pretty fairly.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I mean, I love fiction stuff. I was, that's where I came. My background is not from journalism. It's from making movies, and when I was an 8-year old with my camera in the backyard and stuff, and going to film school, stuff like that. So I saw, originally in the first documentary, this is true, just the stories in real life, they happened in real life, lent themselves so well to sort of this storytelling style that that is loved by the community. It's sort of anime-ish style where it's like which is kind of true. It matches on to what you'd see maybe in going from moment to moment. But there are key ways where it doesn't match on, where it's not true, and that's just I think it's the fragmentary nature of trying to capture truth with story structure. It's not a perfect graft onto reality, and it never will be. So
Yeah, and I mean, it's kind of a good reminder that life can be it's often messier or at least more complicated than we often give it credit for. People, I mean, really like simple stories, simple personas. I mean, you hear about the halo effect where you like someone or you look up to someone and then they can do no wrong. They have this halo around them, and then all they are and all they do is good. And there are times, I guess, where this can be beneficial. This can serve people, but I think the more we can look at each other as real people with complex motivations and who feel pain and want to do better and things like that, I think the better off we'll be. And I think even the discussion around the documentary can serve to help people with that in the community for everyone's benefit.
yeah, absolutely, mine included, man. This has only been a learning experience for me as far as how to approach storytelling, and definitely an interesting one for sure. I had some specific questions I wanted to get into, and maybe like always, we can meander around. It's not a very long list, but I figured the jumping
Sure,
off points. Um,
sure.
There is a part in your episode where you talk about you were envisioning sort of a 3D world or a game in your mind that,
Yes.
being sort of like something that you've eventually found an analog for in Melee and sort of what that was. And I sort of try to capture that feel from a clip of Melee Lite, which is like a Melee-esque
Oh,
game,
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
it's supposed to be that sort of world. But could you talk a little bit more about what that mystical game was? What was that sort of envisioned thing? I don't know if you remember at this point, but I'd be curious if it had differences from Melee.
That's an interesting question. I mean, looking back on it, I realized what I just wanted was what Melee actually was just a faster version of the thing that was already there, and I just didn't realize it. But I mean, I at the time, Mario 64 was out and other things had come out like Sonic Adventure 2 Battle. There was much more of a open world type of feeling that was still kind of new in games. Like now it's like, okay, Breath of the Wild's cool, but most everything else messes it up. It's like now it's like, another one. But at the time it was still really interesting. And so, I don't know if I was pulling from anything specific, but I was just thinking of, like you're out there and you're in the world and there are possibilities to explore just like there are in this world. But you can fly or you can or whatever, you could run much faster than normal or whatever, right? And it's difficult, like it's not like something that someone could just do. It takes practice and you have to navigate the nuances and I don't want to speak too much about it because I don't want to paint over kind of what I wanted then with what I think of now, and so I'm struggling to try and even do that at the moment. But I think I looking back, I just felt like Melee was so close, man. It was so close. It's just if it was just faster and it was harder, it'd be a perfect game. And then it was, and then it was, and I was like, okay, well, perfect. So I can't say I can't say deviating beyond that too much would even give it that much justice of a thought.
Yeah, and that is it's so funny because it really was. Melee was just waiting there for you to discover that
Yes.
extra layer to it. And there is that segment in the first episode where Toph is talking about like coming to like learning basically how to like you train your hands. It's like so it's almost like you're living an RPG where you wake up the next day and you're a little better and you understand it a little more and you can express yourself more accurately. So that definitely rings true for me, at least with Melee for sure.
Yeah, and I love, I try and people always say like, when a new Smash comes out, it's often not as technical, and there's always the argument Melee is too hard to get into. It's the barrier of entry, and I'm always like, yeah, well, it's a good thing no one ever practices dribbling in soccer or football or anything. And that's such a high barrier to entry. No one plays those games. I mean, and you can pick back and forth with the arguments if you want, and like there are ways you could say like, oh, but people are always using their hands or whatever in ways that are conducive to that, but it's not like what you do in Melee. And it's like, yeah, okay, but I think you're being pedantic at that point, honestly, and not really having a good faith argument. But anyway, I mean, I it's like I think the feeling of doing something more serious like that, you have so much of yourself you can invest into Melee. That's kind of the cool thing about it is because I love that Melee is such a good parallel to actual combat fighting with or to life or like and then there are microcosms of that where it's a dance or a conversation or even have a debate kind of those are weird but like that kind of stuff too the like I just really love that Melee gives you the chance to put in whatever you want to put in, and it'll give you out, whatever you put in, and you can really see yourself grow. And I think that's just beautiful. You don't even need necessarily to play another person to see it, at least for a lot of things. And I think that's really cool too. So I love what it offers, and I think it's such a unique place in esports today, especially when so much of Melee would have been patched by now, right? So I just it's such an interesting place, and I really do want it to have that type of longevity, like a soccer or football. Like, why can't in 200 years people will still be playing Melee? Why not, right? But the people are like, oh, it's old. I'm like, there are people that are older than Melee, not an old game. So that's like it just really depends on your frame of reference, and I don't know, like it's not, I don't say this as someone that's like, read too many Reddit comments lately or whatever. There hasn't been a flame war about that in a while, which is nice. But it's just, I just want to take a moment to gush about what I love that Melee can do for people. And some people have even gotten so angry that they're nice people, but when they play Melee, they just get so angry and they're like, I don't like that part of myself, and they leave. And so I think that's fair, but I also feel like, if I did that, then I would have not learned all of the beautiful things that I would have learned about myself and grown. And so I really do feel like Melee is such a good self-reflective test. And I was very funny after the metagame came out. I forget who it was on Twitter. Someone in the top 50, I believe, said, "Man, why is this game got to be a spiritual journey? I'm just trying to get better, man." you know, like they. So I really had it really had a bit of that impact on people, which is nice for me because I really talk about holistic improvement, talk about mentality on stream a lot, talk about the interrelationships of you as a person and you as a player, and how they're really not so different, or even if they're even different at all. And so I think in that way, metagame succeeded too, and I'm very happy about that.
No, thanks, man. Yeah, I that's the thing. Like, I also like in Twitch chat or whatever, people were saying like, why does Sandbox always have to go so deep? And I'm sure at some deep moment. And it's definitely true that I am drawn to that sort of aspect of the of storytelling. But I never want to tell a story that doesn't at least in some way relate to the larger state of being human. Where
Right.
how am I going to have any interest in telling a story that does not go a little deeper? Like I'm not interested in telling those stories. And I think that, to your point, like the fact that it is this sort of conduit to like you were saying in the end, when the voiceover as you're playing Armada at the very end, I think it's the last lines that you have in the documentary. You're talking about how you can connect with someone. It doesn't matter where they come from. You're going to connect with them no matter what.
Yes.
And you thought
Yes.
that that's beautiful. And to me, there's a reason I put that last, or one of the last quotes that you have, is because it just uh, that will always be one of the most beautiful aspects of it. Besides the fact that it is this incredibly deep game that has a towering limit to what you can achieve in it. It just brings together people from so many different places, and maybe partly because too it was offline for a lot of times, and you had to be in person with the other person. You would establish relationships that you couldn't probably achieve online. I mean, I don't know. Maybe we'll talk about this in a little bit too. What sort of the pandemic has done to the community, but
Yeah.
I don't know. That was perfect to me. You hit the perfect note on that.
Thank you. And in the middle of all of it, I can just hear the people going, "It's just a game. It's just a game. Why do you have to care?" Oh, that it gets me heated. I want to do a long video about that one day, but I'll spare you in this interview from it. But I'll say it is not just a game. It is whatever you make it. If you want to say it's just a game, then you're right. But if you want to say that it's life itself, I think you're also right.
Yeah, yeah. That's I mean that's it's the duality, right? It's what gives it.
Sure.
It gives you both sides. So I appreciated that, and the way you put that. Something you mentioned earlier, and something I think that kind of ties into that a little bit is sort of, we were talking about how Isaiah had this aura. Back then a lot of the pros would say that, and he did. Like just talking with the old school pros, like when you like Isaiah just had this feel where it was like he could just leap out of nowhere and kill you, and whenever he wanted to. Um, and I feel like Mango is the other player that sort of had that same sort of aura, or at least had an
Mm,
aura of like, there's something about this guy that is just mysterious, and it comes out in the way he plays. And you sort of spoke to it in episode 2 at Pound 4 when you felt like he wanted more out of you when
yeah.
you were playing friendlies.
Yeah.
Did you like talk a little bit about that? What do you, is that a correct like characterization that Mango also sort of had that kind of something about him, like an aura, especially in that time?
It's very interesting because, I see the players now that I've been on their level more differently than I did when I was under them more. So I have to go back to kind
Right.
of think about that. I mean, I can answer it as it is, as I more so see it today, but you know, it's almost hard for me to tell. It's kind of like, I'm sure if I played Armada at that time, maybe I'd have said, "Oh yeah, it's the same thing for him." Like they'd just both just absolutely spank me, and it would just been like, "Okay, well I can't tell anything because I'm just getting beat so hard." So it's a bit hard to say, but um, because it wasn't that it would come out of nowhere. It was just that it was constant. It was just constant, just good stuff, and you're just trying to hold on for dear life. I mean, um, I think the analogy I used that I really liked was you're at sea and it's a raging sea and you're just trying to hold on to the ship and hope the ship survives and you survive, or at least enough of the ship survives so you can tell the tale. Like it really is a different kind of experience, and it's good for me to kind of go back and relive that because a lot of people I play on stream are new or they're not as experienced, and so they say, "Oh, it's so crazy," and to me, I'm like, "Well, it was Monday," and so it's good for me to kind of remember, right? It's good for me to remember what that experience is like on the other end because I haven't had many of those. But so I mean, let me maybe more attempt to more directly answer that because I don't want to seem like I'm downplaying Mango. After metagame, I should probably be more careful. Um, because I don't know if we're going to talk about it or not, so I have to directly say that there. And so, you know, there is a lot of things that I think are drummed up by him and his fans, but I also think that there is something at its core that is very different and interesting about Mango. I don't really think you could lie your way into what Mango does. There are things you could exaggerate, but there's not. I don't think you could lie your way into it. I think there is something. I think there is something. There is a real interesting spark of something that's there in him. Being the guy that self-taught himself and was so much players that are like that are just inherently very interesting. So many of them were, in old school melee, they all were pretty much self-taught because there wasn't as an established way of talking and discussing like there was more when I was coming up or whatever. And then some people are more or less influenced by things. But yeah, I mean, I think Mango he's kind of interesting because it's almost like watching an old school player play modern melee in the way that he's like, yeah, I mean, it's like I could double stick DI all this, or it's like I could try to work on my edge dashes, or I could do all that other stuff, but it's like if I just, like what if I just, did this weird offbeat outplay thing that I've been practicing that kind of seems like it works on my friends, and like it's like it seems like it's kind of good in a way other people aren't knowing about, and so I can surprise you with that. Like it really is. I mean, it really is just something that people can learn from it, but I think there's kind of an inherent like way that he's grown up or even something he was born with that just makes it so that he's able to tap into that more than the average person or at least the average melee player. And so I think that is a really unique and interesting strength that people like him have. And I do think that should be valued and it should be celebrated.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, that's the thing. A wife said this. I didn't include it in Final Cut, but he did mention how it was so refreshing and awesome to have five different, top players like you guys that were all so different and all approach the game in a very
Mm,
unique way. Um,
yeah.
I always sort of appreciated that, just as a storyteller, trying to capture you guys in interesting, unique ways. Um, and that's the fact that it wasn't that hard to sort of do that speaks to the way you guys have all sort of kind of found your own way uniquely. So that,
And that's something I think Melee gives back to us too, right? The fact that you can do so many different things and be good. The fact that the characters do have so many ways to express themselves. And I think just, how open the game can be for people to come in, whether that's the accessibility it has now or the way accessibility it has before, and those ways have changed, but there's still a certain level of it, I would say. And that's really nice and beautiful that is something that exists. And so yeah, I mean, I think it speaks to the beauty of melee just as much as it speaks to us. But I'm glad to be part of a reflection of that.
hell yeah, man. And since we're already on Mango as a topic, now that you've been able to watch, sort of how your guys' relationship was characterized in the documentary,
Hmm.
and that was your sort of first time being able to talk about it at that point. Uh,
Yes, I had not talked about it publicly.
yeah. So, but what do you think that accurately sort of, at least from your perspective, kind of characterized it? Is there anything else you want to add to that
Yeah.
sort of?
Yeah, I'd say there are. Well, okay, so first of all, context. At the time, Mango was doing the "I am the goat, every other player is terrible, and I will be remembered forever." And it was just constant, and it was everywhere on every stream, in every Reddit thread, on every Twitter post, in every Twitch chat, and every other top player was sick of it. I was sick of it, and so that was part of my attempt to say, look, there are actually more players, and Mango is actually more complicated than all of this. And so, I mean, that was part of it. There was a frustration there, but I mean, I don't really want my response to be more about that, because I mean, there was plenty of negativity on Mango in that, coming from me, and so I think I've said plenty about that already. But I think something that is not discussed is that it's not like I ever, even at that point, I never hated the guy or anything like that. I have, and I mean, like I was just talking about, I understand and I have a deep respect for him as a player. I think what he's able to do and what he's able to create, I think is a lot more authentic than what many other people can do. um, I mean, even what he does for Melee through his stream, where he brings so many people in, he's a real ambassador for the game in a lot of ways. So many people, associate him with Melee even, and he is, really good at marketing himself, but he's also just really good at being personable with people. He's one of the funniest people I've ever met in my life. I think he has a lot of positive qualities, and I think that we have a mutual respect for each other. And at the time, I did not focus on that because there was so much of just respect was just pouring out of everything. It was coming through the ceiling. It was coming out of my own ears. Like, it was just everywhere. And so, that was certainly a mistake on my part to not include that. I should have been more fair and balanced about that. But I hope that people can understand my perspective too. And if Mango fans are frustrated with that, then I apologize. Certainly was not my intent going into it to make him look bad. That was not my intent. I just wanted a leveling force, and that was really all of it. But again, very very intelligent guy, and the way he learns things and the way he expresses himself and everything like that, I have a great respect for. So
Yeah. Well, I didn't get the sense, even when you were talking about your guys' ups and downs and your relationship with him, that you thought he was like an asshole, or a terrible human being. I
right, right,
the sense that I got, and I think that you mentioned this, is that even when you guys were having, or he was going through, like, and giving you shit for at various points, not realizing for his part that maybe you were going through a really depressive episode, um, that he was still on your side at Apex 2012. He was still in your corner. This is stuff that you said in the documentary, um,
right.
and to that point, like, I really didn't want. I wanted to make sure that to try to give a perspective on Mango and how he is as a person, and I feel like him and his crew kind of gave me that opportunity to hang out with them, and I think I did a pretty good job at capturing the Norwalk sort of
Yeah, I
mentality.
agree. I agree.
It's like an asshole-ish thing where you hang out and you're friends, but you give each other shit, and I don't. I would hope that when people look at that and like listen to the way that you guys interacted, that the takeaway from that is that it wasn't that he's an asshole or a terrible human being. It's just that you come from such different perspectives, you're such different people, that maybe that when you were interacting like that, it was just rough for you.
Yeah, and at the time, I mean, it would have been. I didn't really have the internal force to stand up for myself more either. Or if I did, it wouldn't have been in a way that might have been the most healthy too. And then, um, I
You
mean,
were
we did drift apart some, I think, as a result of me standing up for myself more. So I do think those differences in perspective led to a gap of some sort between us, which is kind of what Hugs mentioned. It's not bad; it's just weird now. And like, but that doesn't mean. But that's again like this is such a hard thing, I feel like, for people on the outside to understand. Is like, gap does not mean hate. Gap does not even mean like. Gap just mean gap. That's all it means. But no, I don't hate the guy, and I don't really think I ever did.
Yeah, and the other thing too, this is partly why I loved your guys' story so much, is because, like you said, you come from different backgrounds. You all come together through a game. You know, you really have this
Yes,
connection through
it was
Melee.
good for me. I never would have met someone like Mango in my life if not for Melee, and I'm very glad I did. Mango, I think, was enormously helpful for me in certain ways. He showed me the value of confidence in certain ways. He showed me, more things about how to be sociable and personable, and how speaking your mind can have people that will support you for that. I mean, there are things that are very valuable that come from knowing Mango. It's just absolutely true. And when he wants to, he can be very supportive. It just depends. But still, I mean, that's none of this is me, and I'm not trying to overcorrect or hide or anything like that. I stand by the things that I said. There were some things that he did that were pretty darn rough, that were really affecting me at the time. And there was also the goat thing. But I mean, but like, I wouldn't have kept talking to him if he was truly awful to me, like 100% of the time.
Right.
I just wouldn't have done it. Like, there were good things too. There was a lot of jokes. There was a lot of mutual laughter. There was some support. And so so again, it's supposed to be a balanced perspective. I was depressed. Might not have given the balance that that it warranted. And also, we're doing a documentary and everything like we talked about. But again, I'm not trying to take the guy down. It's just, it was what it was. It is what it is now. Have respect for him. That's, the gap.
We can come back to Mango if we want, but I had other questions for you.
Okay.
This one you kind of touched on already as your favorite part of the documentary, and I can see why. I think it's a lot of people's favorite part, the Pound 5 sort of sequence.
Yeah.
So there was a moment, when you're in the hallway and you suddenly come up with this realization about Armada and his playstyle and his habits and stuff that you kind of, capitalize on then in the grand final set. Did that sequence of cool swoopy things and orbital shots of Armada, or the Peach and the Falco, was that exactly what was going on in your head?
Yes. 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 You took it straight from my brain. I don't know how you did it. Absolutely unparalleled genius. This Samox metagame, truly a masterpiece for its ability to pull things from the void and make it into reality.
New technology, dude. New technology.
That's why he had to go broke for this one. Not dead, but broke for this one. He was doing the brain siphoning long before the brain chip was a thing.
Exactly.
But yeah, it's very interesting. I at the time, it's very interesting. I was not an incredibly adaptive player. I did not really remember very much from when I played someone. I had to go back and watch the video and do it. And so for me, especially in such a heightened emotional moment, to have just everything become clear and for things to just sift through, it just really felt like, and I haven't had a moment like that since then. It's just that time. There was just something that was like I was meant to have that. And because, I mean, after I lost, I mean, Mango said, I should have tried, like, because I mean, it looked like what it looked like, right? Like, it looked like I wasn't ready, but I was. I just, maybe I didn't know it, or maybe something like that. And so, just to have that experience, I think was just so. It really is just to have like they sang the Pokemon theme song we were playing. Like, what an iconic, amazing thing. Like, no one's singing the Pokemon theme song now. You don't even have the freaking music on Slippy now or whatever, right? Like, it was very funny. It's very funny that it existed, like that everything just happened the way it happened. Is kind of just a wonderful cap off. And, like I said, and then we all rode off into the sunset and lived happily ever after. And then, and then the story, and then the metagame gets weird after that. Then I get weird after that. So it was very funny. All of it's very funny how it turned out. Like
yeah, it is. It's sort of like the first 3 episodes are kind of straight ahead, and then we get into the 4, 5, and 6, and it definitely breaks off into a new realm, which is actually brings me to my next question. Your transition to sort of understanding neutral. After your defeat at Genesis 2, and then you getting into, talking with Cactuar a lot about the Tao of Jeet Kune Do.
Yes.
That whole focus on sort of self-improvement, what did the documentary first off capture that process well, and sort of was there anything that segment sort of missed?
I don't know how well I described it, so I don't even know if I can say anything about that. I don't know what I even said back then.
That was one of my favorite
Um,
sections, by the way. I know it's
oh
not.
yeah, yeah. No, I loved getting the treatment for it and getting a serious treatment of it. I think was very cool. It's very strange though because it's like it's always been this private thing I've hidden away. Everyone's like, "What's your favorite book?" I'm like, I don't know, maybe The Art of Learning, but it was always Tao of Jeet Kune Do. Like I never told anyone. I never told anyone. It was my little thing, Cactus's little thing, and I maybe told like one, and I told like one or two other people I worked with about it, and I talked about it on Smashboards, but no one goes on Smashboards, so it doesn't matter. And so, like then, right, it's on the documentary. So I'm like, oh, it's my little thing, and now it's like, oh, it's everyone's thing, and I'm like, are they gonna get it? Probably not. And, you know, but like that was my feeling about it, right? Like I was thinking more about that than the accuracy of it. I'm like, I hope they don't go run off and get lost in the clouds like I almost did with all of that. It was a very strange experience, and um, you very much can't tell what's going on while you're in it. And I think I probably should have focused more on that while I was discussing it, and not and because I think at the time I was more so focusing on like I have learned many thing from this, and like I learned many thing, but in order to learn many thing, you stumble through fog first, at least
Right,
sometimes,
right.
and like because like I mean I say this quote a lot. I'm trying to say this more on stream now, but success is not a straight line. Like it wasn't like Cactus said, "Oh, hey, have you heard of Bruce Lee?" And I was like, and then like I had a brain blast, and then I knew neutral. Like it wasn't like that. Where we had talks, and I would ask incredibly stupid questions that like people would make fun of me for today if they knew that I asked these just ridiculously unhelpful and seemingly lazy questions. Uh, like like it was not like this enlightened, like, and in this passage, what do you suppose he means by this? I posit that, like, it wasn't some dialectical, whatever, right? Like, it was, like, Cactus was able to formulate a lot of things. And then, I mean, Cactus and I had a couple of conversations afterward. He remembers it a bit differently than I do, but I was pretty firm about how he was driving many things forward, and I would take an aspect of it and say, well, what about this? And then he would create more from that. And I mean, so the portrayal of it was, I think really like I think it really honored the inspirational wholeness and big attempt at truth and source of change and knowledge that I was really trying to pull from at the time. And I think that's good. And um, I think this may encourage some people to go off and be stuck in a la la land, which I don't recommend. I have made a video where I try not to recommend that, but I don't think they got it then either. They assumed that I was thinking that I was trashing what you were doing, which was not my intent at all. I actually thought you honoring it was beautiful. If nothing else, if I could only have people take away one thing from this talk, it is that there's always a new perspective. There's always so much more you can learn and do, and success is not a straight line.
Yeah, well, that's an excellent way of sort of exploring that idea right there. I mean, when you were talking about how the process as it appears in metagame is much more revelatory and sort of like you're already at the finish line. It's like this is the tome, and it's like light shoots out and it gets
Yeah,
into your brain,
and the
um,
angels descend. Yeah,
and like the cool music comes and it's all kind of
yeah,
comes together. Where that makes a lot of as viewers it makes a lot of sense and it's very satisfying to sort of see a transition where you're at a certain point and you're struggling and then you find this tome and then you've made your transition and you've learned how to beat Mango finally, where the way you describe it, which is much more miasmic, it's very sort of you're groping along in a fog, in a certain way that also sort of reflects neutral itself and sort of that concept where you had these very concrete ideas about flowcharty sort of ways to do your
yes.
punish game, whereas neutral was much in and of itself is much more less defined. It's not sort of a if then if this then the other. It's much more it's difficult to tie down, and in that sense maybe
It
it kind
is.
of reflects your process.
Right, and people, I always think this is funny that the people that say this is the right way to play the game, they don't play neutral the same at all. I really just love, what Melee could do to show the differences between people like that. I really love that, to go back to Mango really quickly to pull him in here, I mean, I think that's something that he really enjoys about Melee, and I think he actually expresses that more honestly and without, so much study as a lot of other people. Like I had to do a lot of studying to do that. And then, like Cactus said, like, we talked about that, Mango does that. We talked about that, Mango does that. Like these are things that like he would just kind of intuitively know. And I had to actively research and discover these things in myself to do that.
Yeah, and maybe that's why I think because the neutral game is more obscure, is more sort of hidden, and not kind of right out in front, like the way that maybe a punish game is more obvious as a sort of a place to optimize. Maybe that kind of contributes to this mysticism that surrounded Mango, at least in my view.
Yes, yes.
So where it is, it's sort of like you couldn't necessarily understand it right away. So
Yes. I do think his play, especially over the years, has become a lot more streamlined and a lot more understandable. Um,
right.
and so it's very funny to kind of watch fan reactions to that when it looks very different to me. But at the same time, I mean, there are still very unique and interesting things he does, so it makes sense.
I only have one more question about the documentary before my wrap up questions,
Okay.
and this one actually kind of gives you a chance to because every other kind of tournament mostly kind of happens before these interviews, so I can get people to kind of talk about and their thoughts on it. But Apex 2015 was like happening that was the climax, so there was no kind of thinking back on it. But what was your sort of experience with Apex 2015? Um,
Oh man.
yeah, some of those matches, like you versus Leffen and winners. I don't know. They're that to me, obviously one of the craziest tournaments ever of all time, maybe the craziest. But it was also some of the most intense matches I've ever seen, even if they weren't the best melee and points they weren't. But it in a way it was the best melee because it was felt like there was so much on the line. It was so consequential of a tournament.
Yeah, it was so raw. There's so much emotion.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
How did Apex 2015 go from your perspective?
Yeah. I am a little thrown off. For some reason, I didn't expect that question, but it's very interesting. Yeah. So I remember you and I talked, and I was thinking, you know, really like to use this time to practice for the tournament a little bit more, but really got to tell my story too. I remember thinking about that, and then um, I remember practicing some more, and I was really getting into a much more peaceful place. My meditative practice, I was getting so I was having flow state experiences while meditating sometimes, and it was just beautiful. And I was getting so clear minded, and my exercise was going better, and things were really going good. But I was still kind of depressed, and I was still reacting more to negativity than I should. So it was very again kind of like Apex 2014. There was the very interesting two selves, if you want to simplify it. Um, and I won't get into it, but there was something that would happen to me for probably about a week right before, for continuously, for or relatively continuously, for about a week before Apex 2015 that really impacted my ability to play well. It's quite a negative time, and I remember when the fire marshals came to shut down the event. I was like, "Oh, good." I was kind of miserable. I don't really even think I want to play. Like, I was like, "I hope it gets canceled." That was my thought. I was like, "I hope this tournament gets canceled." That was what I was thinking, and because I was just like kind of on the thing at that point, especially like, oh, this is so much extra effort. Like, I gotta move to a different hotel now. Like, can I just gonna go home and meme on it on Twitter? It's whatever. So that's what I was thinking. There was still the core, like that's kind of the thing that I kind of take away from it is like my practice was so good. My in-game practice was so good, but then also like my mental practice had still been so good, like emotional, but also my meditative and everything, that I just couldn't. There was just a certain level I just couldn't fall past, and that to me is super sick. I have pride in that tournament, not because I think it was my best melee, but because like I was creating such beautiful things when I was playing. I wish I could have given people a really good performance around that time. I think it would have been. I really do think magical is not an unreasonable word to use because it was so like what I felt like I was doing was really awesome. But I mean, that possibility is still there, and in greater extent today. So it's not like it's gone. But um, anyway, um, I'm playing, and I'm noticing the phenomenon that Toph talks about eventually, where I'm losing the first game and then winning the other two, which is a very interesting experience. Like, oh well, it's like I'm putting myself up against the wall, and then I'm realizing I can do things. It really is very much like like I kind of want to sabotage myself, but I have so much that can still come forward for me. I mean, again, in that way, I think there is a parallel to Pound Five. But it's like more subtle and more throughout. Again, I'm just thinking of this. I'm just realizing this now as I'm talking. Um, and the thing I remember about S2J, so I actually wanted to play Falco against him the whole time, but Money Mike was there. It's a North Carolina player, ranked top 100 for a little bit, and I was about to play him, and I said, "I'm about to play S2J," and he said, "Oh yeah?" He said, "Who are you going?" Because I mean, people knew about the Marth at the time, so I think I'm going to go Falco, and he's like, "Really? You know he hates Marth, right?" I was like, "Yeah, he does." So I picked Marth the first game, and I lost, and I was like, "I'm going Falco," and then I won. It was very funny. So thanks, Mike. Uh, no, messing around, but let me think. We're backstage. So then I'm in top eight. There's always that downtime before top eight. That at the time I would have called it a brutal downtime. Like you're just sitting there, and then you know who you got to play, and then people are going to be expecting things, and do you know if you're going to do well? And there's no point in practicing because you already did a bunch of that, and you're just waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting. You're like, it's like a firing squad, but more interactive. Um, that's kind of the way you can feel about it sometimes when you're just waiting for it. And I'm sitting there and I'm waiting for it, and then finally the matches are going underway. And I remember still something Leffen said to me when we were backstage. Because we were all gathered back there, and Leffen, at the time was not customary to have him back there before top eight. It was still a new thing. Um, Obviously became a lot more common, but excuse me, at the time it was new. And he said something to me. He said, "Soon we go to war." Like he said it like he had a real conviction to it. And like to me, because at the time, I'm thinking of Melee as a dance, as a conversation, as something as you want the person to play well and you want to create something beautiful, right? So like, I'm like, so I hear that and like I struggle to not laugh, and I'm like, yeah, man, that's what's about to happen, I guess. It's a very funny dichotomy of different ways to view things. It's very interesting. And I remember coming out I remember playing Armada the first time, and he's playing Peach, and I had practiced the Peach matchup with some local Peaches, and I had made them quit. Like they just couldn't get a hit. They couldn't do anything. They were angry. I mean, one of them like stormed off and just left. Or
Wow.
yeah, like I was, and like because I had just fine tuned, like I had really discovered some more stuff about the matchup, like a good position to play, and then my reactions were really good, and so I was like, yep, this is a terrible matchup. So I made a conscious decision before top eight because I was like, I can either do neutral or I can do punish, but I can't do both. And I knew that being true to myself at this point, or at least my aspirations, was being true to neutral. So I said, I'm not going to try and go for convoluted punishes because, like, your neutral game and your neutral brain and your punish brain are not the same brain. Like you're like it's kind of like what we've been talking about for a while, like the punish, and like there's a transition state where a lot of people struggle to adjust to that. Like even good players can struggle to adjust because like neutral is convoluted and complex and everything, and then you grab, and then there's like that moment where it's like, oh, now we're not playing the same thing. Now we're doing the thing where it's clearly advantaged, and what's the best thing to do, and all of that. And it's a very different way to think. The game state changes, and I recognize that because of like just the emotional challenges I still had. I was like, and I recognized my shortcomings. I said, there's no way I will be able to execute my punish game correctly, or I can not execute my neutral correctly. And I said, what is more authentic to me? It is more authentic to do neutral. And so I'm playing Armada, and I'm not doing the up throw that I was doing at Apex 2013. I'm pushing him off the level because I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Wouldn't it be easier if the Peach float from this way than coming down into me? That means Peach have less option. And so, like this was truly a Jimmy Neutron brain blast moment. So so I changed to that, and I'm very glad I did. because that went much better for me. Just the punishes were easier; it wasn't as much of a grind. I mean, I never really felt hopeless for me at any time. Felt pretty rough for him overall. And then I'm playing Leffen, and I even mentioned this to you when you came to my place to interview me in my parents' place because I really wanted to talk about it. Like, I feel like I have become more sensitive over time and not less. Like, and I don't just mean like I don't necessarily just mean emotionally. Like, food affects me more in certain ways now, and I noticed that parallel like emotional changes I was making. So again, just the connection of everything. But so anyway, that also included emotional sensitivity, and I could really feel like there was just so much emotion like coming off of Levin. Like he just has an excess of it, right? Like he just, and I think in some ways it has changed, but not really stopped being true now. um, I still feel like it really comes off of him. And what I said to you back then was, we're sitting down, and we're playing, and I feel like I hear the death metal music, and it's so intense, right? And I think in a way it's still kind of true, but I think there's just so much emotion. Like there's like his like desire to win, and then maybe anxiety, but then also like he wants to actually murder my family. But then like like, but there's just so much there. There's just so much there, and it's like and it almost can't even be contained in a person. It's just like it's like if you could imagine like radiation. That's not the right word. It's like if like it's like
You mean like
something
fire
is
coming off of him, like the way he's
sure,
portrayed?
sure, sure. Yeah, fire. Even that's a good way to describe it. Like there's just so much coming off of him, and it's like it's so powerful, and it's not even something he's intentionally trying to do, right? Because I think like so many people just focus in that it's not a viable thing, but it just really I was like really impacted by it, and I'm sitting there like wow, he's putting out so much like it, and I have to not let that influenced me because it like I was really being receptive to a lot of what people were putting out in that kind of way, but it was so incredibly charged with him. um and so we're playing, and I'm experiencing the fox, which is incredibly powerful. His fox is already just a monster on its own. That certainly hasn't changed. But the person Leffen was also just sending a lot. And again, not even really at me, but almost just like it was almost just a thing that was just he was had to play, and he knew it was important. And it was out there, so that almost changed it. Like if it was at me, it might have even been easier to handle because it's like, okay, well, I know at least how this is directed. I understand it, but it was like just a thing that was out there. I was like, wow, this is so much, and it's about so like I just really could notice that and feel that, and it was really powerful. And so we're playing, and I feel like I'm playing against the emotions of Leffen and the player of Leffen in a way that I really haven't against any other person ever. Now that I'm thinking about it, very interesting stuff. And every time I see clips of this set, it's always defined by like these moments of a pause and then something explosive happening. Like I'm moving around and I hit him with the forward smash, or I barely grab the edge after I jab him out of a side B, or I wait a second, then I run off and double jump spike him. Like there's these moments of like there's a pause and there's an explosion, and it really kind of feels like you're like there's a song and it's about to reach its peak, and you hear the violin like. And you know something crazy is about to happen, like this tension is just sitting there, and then and then the bass drops or whatever, right? Like it's not the perfect parallel for this, but yeah, I mean it really was such an emotional experience on a level I don't think has ever happened before. And I mean honestly, I guess to say all of this, I guess I should really say thank you, Leffen, for that, because that's a lot to give. I mean, and so you know, certainly I'm looking forward to playing him much more. I want to see what that experience is like now, because now that I think about it, very very interesting.
Yeah, that is exactly kind of what I was feeling when I was watching it. In the moment, like again, this tournament was just billed as like it was the first tournament to go over 1,000 entrants. It was the first time all the five gods and Leffen would be there.
Yep.
It really felt momentous. Obviously you had Chillin and Leffen, that sort of
Yeah.
like that whole thing. So it felt so momentous. And when we were at the winners finals, and it was back and forth down to the last stock, it was just so intense. Like you could cut the tension. So every time you had an explosive moment like that, you could hear the crowd was just in it, even though it was like what, like 3 in the morning, 2 in the morning when we were playing
Oh
that.
gosh, it was so late. Like it's kind of funny. Even that tournament even had the foreshadowing, which Bernal actually alluded to, which I'm really glad he did. The foreshadowing of what's kind of going on with me now is I was really starting to get burnt out. I never
Yeah.
got burnt out at melee tournaments, like I was saying, but also like I was saying too, I also gotten more sensitive to things. I won, and I mean, you could see my reaction. I'm like, oh! Like I'm not jumping up and popping off. In fact, I'm exhausted. I'm completely exhausted. Like I didn't want to hold. I was like, I don't want to hold this stupid trophy. I want to go lie down. you know, like I was so beat, and then like I was still in like a kind of depressive place, and I'm holding it up, and like I'm kind of like I don't even really want to do this. Like I'm just kind of doing it. But then there's a surge of something that runs through me. There's a surge, like there is that other self. There is that stuff I've been working on, all the things that I've been doing to prop myself up, saying you worked for this, you earned it, and it comes through me, and then I authentically and honestly go, I did it, and like out of nowhere, right? And then everyone's like, yeah, and so I mean, it really is just such a, I mean, you know, I mean, honestly, it probably, if it sounds like just the way I've talked about things, it almost sounds like I just made all this stuff up. But it's just my life. It's just weird. It's just all this all this emotional stuff just kind of happens, and it's fun, and it's beautiful, and it's great, and
Yeah.
I love it.
You live your life like a story, man. It's a
I
crazy
really do.
crazy story.
Yeah, it is. It's a beautiful story too. It's just something I've not always admitted, but I mean, you know, really looking back, I can see a lot of that now. If not for me, then at least for the value for other people, which is wonderful. The last few years, I mean, have been a pulling away from the community. It's really been a restructuring of everything. Like there was a period of time where I wasn't playing Melee. I haven't stopped playing Melee since I started playing this beautiful game, but I had to stop because I had to recognize that in order to have Melee, I needed to not have Melee. I guess probably the right way to say it.
Yeah.
And so I've really come to understand even the value of Melee because I didn't have it at one point, and so now playing Melee is a conscious decision. It's not an active habit even. And so I think esports. I think my relationship with the two women that were referenced. I think even my relationship, my friendship with Mango, my relationship with Melee. I think all of that pushed me to the point that I've been at the last few years. And that place has been a place where I've had to unlearn everything and kind of learn it again. Like what is the value of a conversation? Because it used to just be, oh, well, I could just talk to whoever. And then I realized, oh, if I talk to someone and I'm in a certain state, I will not be able to move the rest of the day, even if it's only for 5 minutes.
Right.
So I've really tried to figure out more of what's important. I've really tried to figure out what really matters, and I don't feel like I have full answers to that yet. Um, I think this is good for a community to see a person that has struggles like this. I mean, Me Too King's been open about his depression, which I think has been good. I've been open about my depression, which has been good. Um, and certainly there is more going on in the community than that, obviously. But I think it's good to have people be human and be discussed, which I think is really great about what your documentary has done. So I'm just super happy that that exists.
Well, I appreciate you as always, my dude. Thank you so much
Thank you so much.
for doing this, and I can't wait to talk to you again in the future.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for taking the time as well. I really do appreciate it, man.
Until next time, dude.
See ya.